a variety of American musical genres, including rock, pop, and soul. Yoakam also being honored this month at the annual Academy of Country Music Awards in Nashville. We're glad you've joined us. A conversation with Dwight Yoakam coming up right now.
There's a
Please welcome Dwight Yoakam back to this program. The Grammy-winning singer-songwriter is out now with his first studio album in 7 years, a 12-song collection called 3 Pairs. As I mentioned at the top, he's also being honored this month with a special award by the Academy of Country Music. More on that in a moment. But first, here now some of the video, some of the making of the new disc, 3 Pairs.
lives in Louisville.
Good to have you back on the program.
It's good to see you.
Been all right?
Yeah.
You know, it's funny. I did not realize, I was talking to Chris, our producer, I did not realize that you have lived in L.A. for 30 years.
I said when I got lost trying to get to your studio, I should have known better because I drove air freight all through this area, drove, well, a couple different jobs. I had air freight was one, and I drove for one of the Airborne, say it's a competitor of FedEx.
Yeah.
And then I drove for another company that was based right over near the studio here, and drove bank checks, transporting checks at night. And I was like, everybody has a job. That was my job.
That must have been a long time ago, though.
It was a long, well, I'm, knock wood. I've been able to make a living with a guitar for a lot longer. And yeah, but I drove all over L.A. That was my life for a number of years. I've been out here. Yeah, I said at one point I was born in Kentucky, raised in Ohio, but I grew up in California because it felt like I became an adult here. Right. You know, it's like I landed here. I dropped out. We were just talking about you being a Hoosier, and I dropped out of Ohio State, and we did beat you in football.
And we beat you in basketball.
Every year. Oh, yeah. Beat us bad.
Yeah, well, the same was true of football, though.
But they stole that coach from Ohio State, Bobby Knight.
That's true. Came out,
so we always felt like we had it. But no, Indiana, when we'd have a decent team, and the Hoosiers would come over, it was just decency was out the window. It was like it wasn't going to work. But I left. I quit school and went to Nashville briefly, and then I came to the West Coast in '77. It was still a great kind of feeling of the remnants of the country rock scene out here. I mean, the Eagles were at the apex of their career, huge at that point. Linda Ronstadt was also the zenith of her career, and I was kind of pulled by those beacons, and Emmylou Harris, the great singer, who was based on the West Coast. And it became home. You know, L.A. is infectious. It's once you're here for very long, and it's a weightier place than what people realize too.
Why not Nashville though?
It wasn't. You know, I got there in '76, '77. Even to this day, in retrospect, now I understand it's a different business. The business there is songwriting principally, and the way in the door is vis-a-vis songwriting. Now, ironically, because I've written most of my career, I've written all the almost all the material on this album, and about 80% of my songs. But I was approaching it from a performance standpoint. In other words, I needed to get in a nightclub and stand up and present the material that way. You know, I needed to present it live. And there wasn't, especially then, there's more opportunity now in Nashville to perform and to make inroads that way, but it wasn't that way in the 70s. It was a company town that was in the business of songwriting, and you had to get a job as a staff songwriter. As I look back now, I should have been knocking on doors of publishing companies and trying to get on staff as a songwriter. But it wouldn't have given me the life that I've had, and it wouldn't have allowed me to evolve and have the career that I had. I came out here and I started playing the clubs up the valley, all over from the Palomino, and then we broke into the rock clubs in what was called the cowpunk kind of movement, that young punk rock kids in LA decided they wanted to play, country music. And that allowed me an opportunity to go on this side of the hill, come out of the valley, and the country joints, and play Club Lingerie, the Whiskey, the Roxy, all.
How do you develop? There's two things I've been dying to ask you. I'll ask them out of order. So first of all, in a place like LA, what do you buy this get up at? Like, what do you? Yeah, who sells it? Who sells this in LA?
And these are Levi. These actually.
Oh, the 501.
517.
517. Excuse me.
517 it's cut. People think they're like I have them tailored in.
Yeah.
I said you don't have to. 517 was called. It was a saddleman boot jean,
right?
And it was a slim cut. That's what it goes back. This again, my age. It goes way back to the 60s and 70s. All the rodeo guys, that's what they wore.
Right.
But the 80s, Wrangler took hold, and we're off in the minutia here of jean companies. Yeah. But Wrangler was a looser fit, and cowboys, the population of cowboys started getting bigger, and they wanted wider seats. When I was a kid, guys like Casey Tibbs was the champion cowboy in the 60s, and you wouldn't catch those guys not wearing Levi, that red tag Levi, and they would go really long, and they would cuff them up.
Right.
Remember, John? They would turn the cuff. But these are off the rack, and these boots are actually Rios and Mercedes. But I bought them. First pair that I bought were here in L.A. The Valley. What people don't realize
they sell these hats in the Valley?
Yeah, in the Valley. Wow. There's a couple places that you can still get hats blocked. The place over King's Western Wear was a mainstay in the Valley. They outfitted a lot of the movie. Cowboy culture in L.A. goes back to the movies.
Oh yeah, Gene Autry.
All those guys have seen cowboys. And in fact, the Western Heritage Museum is right up the street from you.
I've been there many times.
Yeah, it's built by Gene Autry. So there was a legacy of it here, and Manuel was Nudi's son-in-law, a gentleman named Manuel Cuevas, and I went into Manuel's shop, and he blocked not this hat, but the one that preceded it that I've still got. I wore for, I think, 29 years. Got it in 1979.
That's a good hat.
Yeah.
That lasts for 29 years.
And I've retired it. I caught it on the top of my car one day getting out and pulled it, ripped it, and then said, okay. This was called an RCA block, which stood for the Rodeo Cowboy Association. I went into him, and he tells stories. I said, I want one of those, what they call a bull rider block. Because the guys used to push it real hard, and the reason they would yank it on the front and the back to make sure it stayed on. Now, again, rodeo's different. They wear like helmets now with face masks. I'm like, what sissy passed these out? Yeah. It's like, that ain't right. You know, people wearing a helmet, the cowboy hats are gone. So I said, and he said, oh, you mean the RCA block, Rodeo Cowboy? I said, okay, I stand corrected. That was on Lancashire Boulevard in 1979. I got that hat. And I went back to him. I couldn't afford his clothes. And I went back to him in 1985, the fall. I had signed with Warner Brothers, and I actually had a little check and I said, I want to do some jackets for the band, the bolero stuff, the stuff that people knew me for early on in the career. I said the Nudie suits, they were called, because Nudie was a Western tailor that did everybody from Elvis's gold lame suit to Manuel did the first jumpsuit at Nudie's for Elvis, but the Beatles went to Nudie's and got stuff. The Rolling Stones, everybody that came to LA kind of went to Nudie's,
right?
Because he did all the cowboy movie stuff, and they did Gene Autry stuff. And so I said, I want to do these jackets. I said, but I don't know how much. I said, I don't have a lot of money, and I don't want you to, He said, money is no object. And I said, I'm in trouble. It's like, and that's been the story ever since. What the people doing is, money is no object. I said, okay.
How did
that's the record business.
So I want to ask about the clothes, and you answered that. But in L.A., How did you go about creating your own sound?
Pete Anderson, who was my first producer, and I played lead guitar for me, really conceived. Being born in rural Appalachia in southeast Kentucky, bluegrass, but more so mountain music was what was just in my DNA. It's a great book, Outliers. I don't know if you've read it. It's
Malcolm Gladwell.
Yeah.
He's been on the show many times.
Oh, well, Malcolm, I mean, the tipping point, of course, everybody knows. But Outliers to me was really, gave me great insight into my own culture. And when he talks on the chapter, he talks about the feuds in Kentucky, this two-county area where all these murders. And he said they started to do research at University of Michigan with that test, the double-blind kind of, psych department where they'd have these kids coming over to take a written test, they thought, and they were setting up an observed incident in a hallway. And all the young Southern guys took offense in a weird way that was beyond what anybody from the North, guys just shrug it off, and go on. And these weren't even guys that lived there. It was like generations removed. I really do believe and it made sense with Malcolm's, his analysis, the observations, and that. It's there. It's in the DNA. We don't escape our great-great-grandparents. We have that in us. What all of us have. That music was there. So we moved to Ohio. Now I'm listening to the explosion. And this record really it comes full circle in my life, in that it's all the stuff I heard in the car radio in Columbus, Ohio, as a kid. 8, 9, 10 years old. We moved out of Kentucky. It's only 90 miles. I mean, Indiana to Louisville, it's an hour and a half drive. You're there. Yep. And so the culture, that whole Ohio Valley is still, there's another great book called United States of Appalachia that is an analysis of our culture, how it was shaped from Bessie Smith and Nina Simone coming out of the Appalachian chain, Greater Appalachia, right? Giving us the culture that we all have in the historic perspective on that. So that was there, and it was clearly in me and was never going to leave. So when I came to California, there was an affinity that I had to 2 or 3 generations earlier, the Grapes of Wrath kind of migration, that the Steinbeck-like Okies and Arkies and Texans that were blown out of the Midwest, out of the Central Plains to California, and they were really ostracized. Buck Owens, as a friend, and he used to have a chip on his shoulder. And after he died, I read something. He said, and what he told me one time was about the shame he felt about his family being so poor that they had one toothbrush and they were passing it back and forth. And he said, I looked at that and I swore I'd never be this poor ever again in my life. Because somebody was asking him what drove him to be a successful businessman. And so, we're shaped by all those disparate elements in our lives, in the lives of people around us. I got here and I started listening, at the Palomino was a famous nightclub, world famous country nightclub. Started in the early 50s and lasted through the early 90s. And everybody from Hank Williams Sr. had actually stopped there and played, like in 51, 52, Willie Nelson, Linda Ronstadt. Tommy Thomason owned it, told me one night, he looked at me, and we'd just signed with Warner Brothers, and we had a line. I was really proud for him and that I was able to pull into that nightclub all these people. Down the block, they were lined up, and he said he was paying me out that night at the end. And we were in his office, and he had the safe open. There was just money, but it was a, experience like none other in terms of dealing with him all the time there. And he had watched me over the preceding 2 years play his club and start to, and come from obscurity and start to become somebody who maybe knock on the door of being known. And he said, I've been watching you. He said, the last person that did this, I had to go the next time to see him at the Hollywood Bowl. And I said, wow. He said, you know who that was? I said, no. He said, Linda Ronstadt. He said, we had same thing. She was here. The last show she played here, you couldn't get in. He said, the next time I saw her, I said, I had to go to the Bowl's here. I've not played there, but he came. Unfortunately, the show he would have come to see me at next was at the Universal Amphitheater.
Big enough.
Which is where,
Yeah,
the next.
Yeah.
So he passed away a couple of months after. I always felt, anyway, I'm rambling.
No.
I'm on tangents here.
I'm loving it. I want to ask about this record in a second, but you mentioned earlier that you dropped out of Ohio State.
Yeah.
That obviously did not in any way curb your appetite for reading. You are a voracious reader. One can just listen to you and tell that.
Well, I read more probably after I dropped out of college. Although the university studies were I found I was just so distracted and pulled by my heart to do, what I wanted to pursue.
That's understandable.
And that's what I think back, and I've regretted many times. I've lamented that I didn't finish, academic, studying. I love knowledge. I think that we come to a greater understanding of the world we live in and ourselves, through reading. And it's I hope that books don't go the way of albums and CD, large format albums and physical product.
From your mouth to God's ears.
Because we think differently. I've done studies about the fact that I keep talking to the rest of the crew. Sorry, it's kind of weird that I keep looking or pointing to people in the shadows. But we go into a different alpha rhythm when we pick up something and literally read it. My parents were not affluent people. Didn't come from the extremities of education. My mother had a high school diploma. I often think, I so wish she'd come, out of the hills in Appalachia and been able to go on to college. I think she would have made a wonderful, teacher. She was a stickler for grammar. She knew sentence structure and subject, predicate, noun. We were always, pushed to, speak correctly if and when possible. I've I've strayed from that a lot, but we were raised in a very adherent religious environment. And I grew up reading, and I've often said to her, she said at one point she felt badly that she didn't encourage me. I was going to attend. I was raised in the Church of Christ, which is the church that founded Pepperdine University.
Absolutely.
And I had a desire to go there, and I probably could have gotten some aid or some sort of academic aid and scholarship. But I was the first kid in the family, and they were like, they're going to go here or there. And she said it before, and I said, you know what? Don't worry about what happened. It's not what she gave me in my cultural past, and what she gave me in the home environment and how we were raised. We didn't read the classics, and we weren't taught the classics, but I was taught to read the King James Version of the Bible. And that's an interesting read, not just because of the theology of it, but because of the sentence, the pentameter of, the language, literally. James was the monarch who followed Elizabeth. So Elizabethan English gave us Shakespeare. King James gave us the New Testament, the Bible, the world that the English language could read. So it's an interesting, I'm half literate.
You're a little bit more than that. You're being modest. So why is this project, the new one called Three Pairs?
Because the word in the song is actually the word P-A-I-R-S, pairs, as in pairs of two. But that doesn't explain why I would spell it like fruit on the front.
Precisely.
Other than illiteracy, I guess. No, it was tongue-in-cheek reference to the moment that gave me the idea for the song, and that was watching the George Harrison documentary that Martin Scorsese did a couple years ago called In the Material World.
Absolutely.
Great piece on
Absolutely.
George. And I was watching that in the kitchen one night after I'd begun recording the album, and I was listening to him tell a story about he and John and the Beatles. He was kind of saying, look, people thought we wrote lyrics that were drug-induced. He said, actually, we had very little dalliance with drugs. And the Beatles, I guess they smoked pot, he said, and they dabbled a little bit with, like, in some mind-opening guru with taking acid. He said, one night, we had taken LSD, he said, somewhere, and we didn't have a bad, trip with anything. He said, but John and I were out somewhere, and someone slipped us acid in a nightclub in London. He said, and we didn't freak out. He said, we just don't know where we were for a day and a half. And I thought, didn't know where the Beatles were, like wandering around. Polaroids must exist of, like, with them, they're like in a carnival. And as they said that, they cut to a piece of footage of John. Scorsese used a piece of film of John Lennon, circa about 66 or 7, mod pop London. Later on, he had a shot of him. There's a later point in his career where he has a shot with 3 pairs of sunglasses on. But this one, he had these big Persol kind of wraparound Italian sunglasses. But he had 3 pair of sunglasses on, stacked on each other at once, just being silly. And he was looking at whoever through all 3 pair and looking. And I was watching and thinking, wow, what a sad, sad loss for all of us. John Lennon, 40 years old. I remember when he died, I was working in a cowboy bar out in the valley in 1980, and Delaney Bramlett, the great, arranger and singer, and Bonnie and Delaney and Bonnie, and he came in and was really broken up. And I was upset, but I was probably 26 or 7 when it happened. And I thought, wow, or maybe 24. I think, but John, he was 40 years old. That night in the kitchen, looked up and thought 40 years old from the other vantage point, the other side of 40.
Yep.
And wow, went, he was so young. And what we lost. And I thought, when I saw it, I looked up and he was laughing, and I thought, yeah, 3 pairs of glasses, huh, John? I went, 3 pairs of glasses, and I got up and started writing what became a title track. So the word P-E-A-R-S, pears like the fruit, was really a tongue-in-cheek reference to John, the Beatles, kind of.
It never ceases to amaze me. I've talked to countless artists on this program over the years, and it never ceases to amaze me where the inspiration for certain songs
you never know
come from. It's just amazing to me.
Very non sequitur, the inspiration, and songs are their own entity to me. I try to listen to hear them over my shoulder somewhere. The song is kind of talking to me. Anyway.
No. Well, there's a lot of good stuff on this project. First time in 7 years. Don't stay gone so long next time.
I won't. You're in a different building.
Yeah, exactly.
The next time.
I was in a different building, and more importantly, your fans. That's a long time, 7 years, man. The new project by Dwight Yoakam is called 3 Pairs, P-E-A-R-S. Dwight, I've enjoyed this, and I've learned so much about you and your life and your inspiration. So thank you for coming on.
Well, I won't hold you being a Hoosier against you.
No, I won't hold you. And I won't hold you being a Buckeye against you either.
And down in Louisville, they even hate you more. In Kentucky, the UK fans hate you.
They really hate us. They really hate us.
They don't like the Hoosiers.
Yeah, but you come back anytime.
Thank you, Tavis.
You Buckeye, you. That's our show for tonight. Until next time, keep the faith.
For more information on today's show, visit Tavis.